we can have an addiction, and just because we don't acknowledge it doesn't mean it's not there. And
Right.
that was me. So like, I really didn't acknowledge it. I was comparing myself to the people who drank as much or more than me. We don't compare ourselves to the other people. Plus, I'm sitting here like, well, I'm very successful. And so I don't have a problem, right? Like, it's not, but it was having a negative effect on me.
Hi, Mary Beth. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. This will be fun.
Yeah, we connected last week. I think we hit it off. It's so cool because you're one of those people that are just so easy to talk to. I think it's because you keep it real, which is what I love about this opportunity to do this with you today, is because you're going to keep it real. And what I also love about the conversation that we're about to get into is we're going to talk about how you overcame alcohol addiction. And I'm just going to say the word addiction. We could play around with that word a little bit later. I know we have some interesting perspectives, but it's so interesting now. Nowadays, when I'm on Instagram, I see all these celebrities coming out and saying how they stopped drinking. And I think it's becoming this movement. I don't know if it's because the algorithms know that I like that or that I watch that, but I feel like it's now becoming this movement. And it's interesting because when we think about a drug, or when we think about even the tolerance level, let's say, that is permitted to drive when drinking compared to any other drug, that's the only substance where we can actually drink and drive, and we actually can get behind the wheel. And so you have an amazing story of how you've overcome that. And you also talk a lot about your childhood trauma, and you talk a lot about the work that you do as well today to help people do the same. And you bring such a beautiful spiritual perspective to all this. So before we dive into it, we're all so curious to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, well, I think addiction, and I definitely would say that I was addicted to alcohol for like 30 years, like not kidding, 3 decades. I was born in the 70s. So I've been alcohol free for a little over 5 years now. I'm 50 years old. So yeah. And I know you quit drinking alcohol too, right? Didn't you tell
Yeah,
me
I
that?
don't I don't drink. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. There's a sober curious movement for sure. Like there are, it's becoming cool. I've heard, I don't have any in my area, but I've heard they're coming out with even sober bars. But that'll be fun when they start doing that, where it's just like they don't even serve alcohol.
Right.
But yeah, so I think like a lot of addiction just gets started for everybody in our childhood. A lot of people, well, we're kind of between the age of 1 and 7 is when all of these patterns, all of this programming's coming at us, and we're soaking it up. You know, little children, we're soaking everything up. We're just little sponges, right? And I know with the food addiction, because I also have the food addiction too, and
Mm.
toxic relationship addiction. Usually, if you have addictive tendencies, it's kind of bleeds into other areas of your life as well. So I just know that I've had the addictive brain. Like I don't have that stop button that other people have. Like some people are really good at moderation, and that's not me. I was really bingy. And a lot of that, I think it does go together, the food addiction with the alcohol, because I had a father. Well, my parents divorced when I was 5. And then like my memories of him coming back, like to the house, he was always taking things out of the house, like things he felt weren't healthy. And I think his heart was good. He had good intentions, but like he'd come over. This just came up. We were at lunch with him this weekend, was my brother's birthday. And he brought up how, because it's Halloween time, we're recording this around Halloween. And he was like, do you remember when I used to come over to the house? He's 81 now. He's like, do you remember when I used to come over to the house and take your guys' candy away? He would come over. But what that did to me is, he's like, you'd be crying. And I was like, yes, that was awful. I can't imagine doing that to my kid.
Right.
And it gave me this, and I have this theory now that I came up with, the forbidden fruit theory,
Yeah.
that because he took it away, and then that didn't make me not want it. It made me want sugar more and candy more. And my very first babysitting job I got, you better believe all I did was buy candy. I went to the store and bought so much candy, and I think like that imprinted me somehow. And when after their divorce and my mom went to work, like first of all, I had that abandonment wound because I really didn't see my dad much. But then when I did see him, he was stealing our candy. But
Right.
but my mom put us with a neighbor to watch us. Good intentions. She's paying this lady to watch us, but she really didn't. In the 70s, it was different. Like there was a lot of neglect going on with all kids, but this lady really, you could tell she just did not want us to be there. Us three
Mm.
kids. I
Mm.
was the middle child. the invisible middle child. And we would ask her for food. Like we'd come home from school and be starving. She would never feed us and things like that. And I think that's another imprint with, even though we're talking about food, it does cross over into, I think it was into alcohol eventually, because, it's just, we start to self-medicate. I was always anxious, like after that divorce, especially, I started to get this separation anxiety. And my brain was like, well, if dads can leave, then my mom can leave too, because I'm 5, right? Like that was just the logical conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So every time my mom left the house, I thought she was going to be there. And in retrospect, I can think like, gosh, my nervous system was just so dysregulated, but there was no therapy. There was nobody to tell me that. And I was just freaking out, like just all the time. Like I was this way up until I was 11 years old.
Hmm.
And well, I was still that way after that. But when I was 11, I went on a vacation with a girlfriend and her family, and they were pretty lenient and just kind of left alcohol all over the counter. And we're at this condo in Florida. And I remember we made this conscious, let's make some drinks. Let's see what happens. Like at 11. Yeah, we were crazy, a little reckless. So we just mixed a bunch of stuff together, and it was just the first time that I ever felt relief in my life. I was like, oh my gosh. And that's why people get addictions. We're just trying to find, even if it's food, we're trying to shove down our feelings,
Right.
self-medicate in some way. And I, for the first time, felt that uninhibited. So I did, because I always had social anxiety.
Right.
So I felt uninhibited. I felt relaxed. My body never relaxed. And this alcohol just took over my system. And I was like, this is the answer to everything.
Right.
This is what I've been searching for. Huge red flag, by the way. Like you don't want an 11-year-old thinking that.
Right.
And I did not become a regular drinker at 11,
Mm-hmm.
but I did at 14. At 14, because I couldn't get my hands on it, or I would have, to be honest with you. I got a boyfriend at 14 who was a couple years older than me, and he supplied me with that. We were drinking all the time, and then also marijuana. It's like it all crosses over. I had a lot of cross addictions going on, and like I said, some people can moderate; they can turn it up and down. I'm one of these people who's all in or all out.
Right.
And having said that, if you notice that you're somebody like that, anyone listening, it's kind of a superpower in a way,
Yes.
because you are going to be amazing at abstinence, because that's like, I'm really, really good at abstaining. It's no problem for me. And I always say like, well, I don't crave alcohol anymore because it's not in my system. I don't crave sugar anymore because it's not in my system. I decided for me personally, it was best, because when I would have a cookie, I would want the whole sleeve of cookies. I don't want just one cookie. That's not how my brain works.
Right.
So like, I just had to come to that conclusion on my own, as most people do. Like nobody could have told me that. A lot of people brought up that I was drinking too much, but I just thought they're boring and I'm fun. And they're trying to control me, right? Because alcohol is so glamorized.
Right.
It's so normal in our society. And now I'm the oddball because I'm sober. And that's kind of what I've noticed over the past 5 years. And I even feel a little bit apologetic when I go to a restaurant, right? Because you can tell they're expecting you to order a drink. And so, I order like sparkling water because you do want to replace it with, and I order it in a wine glass, sparkling San Pellegrino, you put a lime on it, make it pretty. It helps you to feel like, you're doing something special. So, So there, you always want to replace something that you've let go with a healthier version.
Yeah. Wow. So powerful and so much to unpack there. And the first thing I want to say to you is congratulations. I mean, what you did is to be celebrated. And this is huge. And I love that you said it really came from within. It's something that you wanted to do. You made that decision. And regardless of who's saying what around you, it's not until you make that decision. Yeah. And I also love the other thing that you said, which is this obsessive nature. And I'm going to call it an obsession because I'm the same way. I'm a type A. When I get my mind on something, I hyper focus and I become obsessed. I'm an all or none person. But I love how you also said that can be your superpower. That can be your superpower around abstinence. That can also be your superpower around, well, goal-oriented things. And so when you put your mind to launching a business or starting your podcast or whatever it is that you're doing, I know you're doing amazing things in your world, but I know that obsessive nature comes in. And I just see a woman who truly knows herself. And when you know yourself and you know that you have that nature, it's all or none. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where you have to make that decision for yourself. And we had this conversation last week when we connected. And I think when you really understand you're not that person who's got that off switch that you can just have one and walk away, then a different type of work needs to be addressed. And so I want to rewind a little bit to what you said earlier in your childhood. And here's what I hear you saying. You, due to the circumstances of your upbringing and your parents' divorce, you triggered that nervous system state. I call it protection mode. We call it fight or
Mm-hmm.
flight. We call it sympathetic nervous response. And there was a lot of anxiety always, and a lot of fear around losing parent, fear around abandonment, not really feeling safe. And anytime we don't feel safe, our nervous system is going to do everything it possibly can to regulate that feeling. And food, on a very primitive level, is that first line of defense that offers us safety. I mean, without food, we perish. And it
Yeah.
seems like there was an added layer for you with just this actual real food scarcity, taking away your Halloween candy. And when you said that, my heart, oh, my heart, because I remember as a kid, oh my God, you wait for that day of the year and you collect all your candy. And my kids just went trick or treating and they count all their candy and they line it all up. It's a huge thing. And then to your point, to be overly then restrictive around food, it continues to create that food scarcity. And so I think it almost sounds like you lean towards food at first to cope with anxiety. Once you got that green light, when you started
Mm-hmm.
babysitting and you could access all that thing, and that eventually turned into alcohol. And so this is a powerful coping mechanism, and it's one that continues to transform. And I know right now you're in this place where you haven't actually gone back to some of those coping mechanisms. You've changed your relationship with food, you've changed your relationship with alcohol. And I love that you also had shared with me earlier that you brought this spiritual aspect to it. What I'm most curious about is, okay, I know you're a very powerful woman, and it seems like once you put your mind towards something, you do it. But I still feel like there was something else. You had another driving force. Maybe that's spirituality, maybe that's something else. And I'm curious for you, what was that? What was that, maybe that line in the sand moment where you decided, okay, no more. Like I have to
For
make some changes.
for alcohol specifically, because like I feel like I've like changed so many things in my life, including the toxic relationship thing that was
Oh, we
from
want to get into that
the
too.
anxious attachment
Yeah,
style developed because of that abandonment wound and all. And then I'm like this clingy person in relationships, right? And when you're kind of clingy in relationships and you have that anxious style, who do you attract? You attract those
right.
the opposite, kind of like the manipulative types. They can see you from miles away. You become a people pleaser. And so like and then if you're a people pleaser, you get yourself into some
Right. Right.
shady relationships, kind of, because it's basically like you feel you have great intentions being a people pleaser because you just really want people to like you. And I think Gabor Mate said it best. He was like, when you don't feel wanted as a child, you're going to make sure you're needed. And I think that's what I did in relationships, right? Like so I would be overcompensating and just I just didn't want my boyfriend to break up with me or things like that. So I would it's self-betrayal. At some point you start to abandon yourself
Mhm.
and just kind of live for them instead of yourself. So that became a big pattern in my life too, which all stemmed from the same stuff in childhood.
Right. Right.
But yeah,
So, Mary Beth, I think,
self-awareness is the thing.
yeah, I think that's what you're saying is you start to notice that this was a recurring pattern.
Patterns.
Okay, can you expand on that? Because this is huge. So this takes massive level of awareness. You're right. So can you share a little bit on that?
Well, it was definitely a journey. And then it's interesting because it was kind of like this slow journey and then like all at once of doing, because I'm doing
Ah,
this, all of the spiritual recovery work, all of the spiritual recovery work. And then when I did have the actual aha moment, it was all at once. It's very interesting.
wow.
So I'm gonna say the healing really started in 2006.
Mhm.
But like you can't heal anything you don't acknowledge. Like you
Right.
said, like alcohol went last because
Mm.
I didn't I again, I'm comparing myself to my friends and I'm highly functional. The whole time I'm drinking, I'm running two businesses. And that's kind of who I'm speaking to mostly is, to your listeners. We can have an addiction, and just because we don't acknowledge it doesn't mean it's not there. And
Right.
that was me. So like I really didn't acknowledge it. I was comparing myself to the people who drank as much or more than me. We don't compare ourselves to the other people. Plus, I'm sitting here like, well, I'm very successful. And so I don't have a problem, right? Like it's not, but it was having a negative effect on me. In my 40s, it really started to have a negative effect on me. But to back up, 2006, I started learning about law of attraction. And that's what I mean. That was the beginning, because that's when so many things started to improve in my life. Like that's that just knowing like, oh my gosh, we have so much control over our day, over our life. Then I realized I'm over there letting life throw me around by default. Like I didn't know, like everything's energy, and we can, have these, the energy we put out is the energy we put back,
100%.
and that we have these, thoughts that we're just like, we're not monitoring our thoughts. Most of us are just living on autopilot, having the same thoughts as the day before, as the day before, as the day before. And then we're wondering why things don't change. we don't change our patterns or behaviors, and our feelings are even manifestations. And for people who are listening and think it's woo-woo, all manifestation means is that, everything starts as an idea or a thought, right? And then you're bringing it into the physical reality. Like anything you look around and you see physically around you, that's a manifestation. It started as somebody's thought or idea.
Well said.
So that's what it is. And it really is science. Like people think it's woo woo, but we really, at the end of the day, like we can't control, like it's not a religion. It's not like the law of gravity is a universal law as well, right? We don't get to say, well, I'm not going to apply the law of gravity today. It's just same way with manifesting. We're always manifesting. The law of attraction is always happening, whether we acknowledge it or not. So I just highly recommend learning about it so you can start creating your reality with intention instead of, like I said, by default and just letting the world throw you around. So when I started learning about that, that's when my life really started to turn around, because I got out of that victim role. Because it was before that, I was always like, my husband did this to me, or, anyone who would listen. I was just really stuck in the victim role. Nothing was ever my fault. I never took any personal accountability. So the law of attraction, like it's not coming at you that way, but that's what you naturally start to realize. Well, that, like I said, we're powerful creators and we have this control. And as long as you're blaming someone else, you're also giving them the credit for your life. Like, so like, don't give anyone the blame or the credit for how your life's turning out. Take that responsibility and realize, oh my gosh, because you're giving them power over you, even when you're blaming them for something. So you just got to be like, hey, all of my shitty relationships I was in, I was there too for it, right? Like it wasn't one-sided. So there's a lot of personal accountability, a lot of self-awareness. I did a lot of work with it, because my dad also was one to tell you, oh, when you're gaining weight. So I had a lot of disordered eating growing up and things like that. So all of that I've healed. Our mind, there is a mind-body connection. Learning about that was so helpful. Our cells are always listening, and we have all this negative self-talk, and it's kind of like just bad programming that we need to kind of swing the pendulum the other way and almost brainwash ourselves with the good programming. Because I really noticed that, like, when you stop and you just listen to how are you talking to yourself, you should talk to yourself the way you would talk to your child or your best friend or somebody that you're trying to uplift. And we can be our own worst enemies. Like I'm very self-critical. I'm really not that critical of other people, but I'm very self-critical. Right. So it's a matter of catching yourself, self-awareness, catching yourself, interrupting those patterns, and like look in the mirror. And even you're not going to believe it yourself at first, right? You're not. And it's just fake it till you make it. Like just tell yourself you're hot. At first it's going to feel awkward. Just start doing it, because we got to go overboard with the brainwashing the other direction, right? Because it's not really harder to think positive about yourself. It's not really more difficult. It's just that we've been programming ourselves the opposite way, right? So it's time to start with the other direction. So we've been practicing the negative self-talk. So now we got to really just practice the positive self-talk, because our cells are always listening. And when we start to, you're going to see your body change just through your thoughts. And it's very interesting, because a lot of that negative self-talk will give you what I had, body dysmorphia. Like I didn't see myself in reality because of I would just focus on my flaws only. Right. And I think a lot of us do that. We look in the mirror, we just look at the parts that we don't like. And it's like, look at the whole picture. Tell yourself you love yourself. Tell yourself you're hot. Start doing it. And it feels weird, but it does eventually get to where you do start to, you're going to start to see the change, even just from the talk. You're going to start to see it.
Yeah. So
And then you're going to start to develop better habits because it's self-love is so important.
yes.
And then once you love yourself, you're going to start eating foods that love you back. You're going to want to get rid of lower vibrational substances like alcohol.
So
You're
good.
going to want to do this stuff because you actually love yourself. And when I was drinking, it was more like I didn't love myself. I wouldn't be doing that to myself. But honestly, about alcohol, I didn't know, like I knew it was bad for our liver. Everybody knows that, but I really didn't know. Like a lot of it was this knowledge that I gained when I added on an addiction recovery niche to my life coaching. I was already a life coach, very successful. Like for 2 years, I wasn't teaching addiction though. I'm like, I'm going to add an addiction recovery niche to help other people with addictions because I've conquered mine. I still hadn't admitted I'd already like the food, the relationships, we were already good there, but I still hadn't admitted the alcohol. But when I'm learning more about addiction and more about alcohol and gaining all this knowledge, I was like, uh-oh, like I couldn't, it wasn't somebody else telling me. I had to admit it, I was just like, I recognized it and really resonated with it. And then like learning like, hey, if you can't put something away for a week and it's having a negative effect on your life, that's something that is an addiction. And with this book, Alcohol Explained by William Porter, that was when I really learned, like I was blaming my hormones because, I was in my 40s, right? For everything. Right. Like I couldn't sleep. I was, everything was, oh, my hormones, I'm perimenopause, blaming everything. And he's discussing that, alcohol is a depressant, which we all know. And your body's doing the normal thing by creating stimulants to counteract the depressant.
Right.
So then that after 4 hours after your last drink, 4 or 5 hours, you end up not having that depressant and only the stimulant. So that's why a lot of women, especially, will wake up at 3 a.m. After their last drink and they're stimulated and you're like, why am I awake? And sometimes we call it like anxiety or something like that. But that's why you're awake, because your body's doing that natural thing and then moderation stopped working for me. And he explained that's because your body creates the amount of stimulants as your usual. So even like, let's say I usually have a bottle of wine, bottle and a half, and that's easy. That was really easy for me to do. I'm not going to lie. It's a bottle and a half of red wine. That was my thing. So, because you're drinking it over time with your friends, it's like so easy to do that. Right. And then, but this night I'm going to moderate. I'm only going to have one glass. Well, your body creates those stimulants in the first glass. So I was like, oh my gosh. So once I knew that, and then I learned that alcohol is linked to 7 different types of cancer. Nobody talks about this. It's not on the labels, and it's not on the labels intentionally, guys. Like, it's going to be on cigarettes, but it's not on, it says we've got like do not operate heavy machinery or something like that, and then it talks about the birth defects. But cancer is not on these labels, but it is. It's actually a group 1 carcinogen, right up there with tobacco and asbestos. It's right up there. Right. So it kind of reminds me of like the 1930s through the 50s, where the tobacco companies were actually paying doctors to prescribe cigarettes. It kind of feels like this kind of scammy thing where doctors were even like, oh, have some red wine at night and that'll help you with it was like healthy or something.
It's good for
your heart. It's good for, and maybe it is in small amounts, but I would say that's probably 3 ounces. And I don't think that's probably, people are probably more like me and they take it and run with it. Well, it's for my heart.
Right.
Drink a whole bottle.
So is eating grapes. You don't have to have the wine to get the effects.
True.
Have some
you
grapes.
can even buy that pill. Is it called resveratrol or what? I can't remember what it's called, but that ingredient in wine that's good for you, you can actually buy it in supplement form. Right. And that's what I used to try to do to cancel out the alcohol, was like, I'll just take milk thistle. And I was pretty healthy otherwise, like by that time. So like I would think that I could just take supplements and get rid of the bad effects. But that's not how it really works.
Right. Wow. Wow. So good. And I find the most powerful weapon to really overcome any addiction is knowledge, is learning how is this not serving me? Right. Because to your point, we don't know what we don't know. And there's this great documentary on Netflix, The Truth About Alcohol, that talks about a lot of things that you shared. And it's just 1 glass of wine. We think that 1 glass of wine is serving us because it's great for our heart health, like you just shared, but it's actually very detrimental to our health. And again, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, it's a toxin. It's a toxin that it's a legal toxin that we're introducing in our body, and we're allowed to drive. I also want to come back to what you had said earlier about the law of attraction, and
Mhm.
whatever we put out, we get back. And I absolutely agree that positive affirmations are something that we have to nourish, that we have to actually harness. And the way that I like to see this is I have a forest. Over time, I have a forest of negative thoughts. All of my negative thoughts that I've had up until now, I have built a forest. And
Mhm.
when we start with those positive affirmations, it starts to feel a little bit awkward at first because we're not even believing what we're saying. So if we say, "Oh,
Mhm.
I'm hot," in front of the mirror, or "I'm smart, I'm successful, I'm abundant," and all these things, and your subconscious mind is like, "No, you're not. No, 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 you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not." I like to see it as that's my first seed. I just planted that
Yeah.
seed. And every single time I do the affirmation, I'm gonna plant another seed, I'm gonna plant another seed. And then every single day, as I repeat these affirmations, I'm watering these seeds. And eventually, these seedlings are gonna become trees themselves. And eventually, they're gonna become a whole forest. And so, patience is really, really important when it comes to starting these affirmations, and really starting to be more intentional around what it is that you're wanting to implant in your mind. Because to your point, Mary Beth, you're living most of your life in this place of reflex, reacting to everything around you. You're not in the driver's seat of your life when it's always someone else's fault. It's always someone else to blame for your mishaps or your life being the way it is. But the moment that you take ownership and you intentionally start to implant those thoughts, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some patience. So I'm so happy that you brought that up, because it's such a simple concept, but you're right. Look around you. Everything that you have in your environment is your doing. And it's
Mhm.
you are involved in that process, even if it is a relationship that's not serving you.
And it's the
Um,
feeling world more than like, so even it's not
yeah,
just the thoughts, it's the feeling world. And so that's why people talk about mind heart
yeah,
coherence,
yes,
because you want to get those in alignment. And that's why for a while you're just feeling so fake. But we also, it's not just about saying positive affirmations. You also want to start taking different behaviors, and then you're gonna notice the more that you start focusing on this, because focus is everything. You're going to notice things will start to shift for you energetically, even. So, and it's so complicated. And that's why I like when in 2006, when I saw The Secret, that's when I was first like, okay, like this really resonated with me, but it's very basic. That's why I love teaching it, because it is complicated, because we all have a different point of attraction. And
right.
we think, well, law of attraction doesn't work, but it's when you think about, okay, well, it's a point, our point of attraction is everything from birth, all of our programming from birth. That's part one. Part two is our momentum on a certain subject. So health is
Mm,
a subject, money is a subject, relationships are a subject. So all of these things, like we have a different point of attraction for each subject too. So it gets
mm,
more and more complicated, and you can see how individualized that is for different people. And then the final part of that equation is, how do you feel right now? So it's a very complicated thing individually. And the thing is most of the reasons we get stuck is because of limiting beliefs. So it
mm.
becomes back to changing that programming. And the good news is we can change it, because the simple law of attraction formula is ask plus believe equals receive. We just
Right.
get stuck on that believe part. And that's what I like to do with my coaching, is help people with that, because that programming is what causes resistance to it. And that programming is what keeps us stuck, those limiting beliefs.
Wow, so good. I love that. I love how you put that. And I love that it is multifaceted too,
Mhm.
because ultimately that ability to attract is also the ability to receive. And so whatever you put out, you have to also make sure that you're open to receive that. And that now is starting to focus on what are our limiting thoughts and our beliefs, and our identity, our self-concept. My last question to you, I'm super curious, and I have my own reservations about this as well. But I know you tried the 12-step program. So when you were overcoming addiction, you also tried the 12-step program. And I'm curious, why do you say it didn't work for you? What about it was not successful for you?
So it went against my spiritual beliefs, to be quite
Yeah.
honest. Like I can't be in a, like for me, the words I am, there's nothing
Yes.
more powerful than that
Yes.
phrase I am. So saying I am an alcoholic, like
Right.
I don't say that ever. I don't
Right.
believe that ever, because we need to actually change our identity if we're going to really
Yes.
change.
Mhm.
So I am, you're when you say that, you're in powerful creator mode. You're in creator mode. I am. So make that word after you say I am, make it a good one, because you're
Mhm.
creating whatever you're saying.
Mhm.
So what I do say, what is realistic is I'm a person who used to have a bad relationship with alcohol, but I no longer do. Right. So that's feasible. I can say that, I discuss alcohol all the time. So, I have to be able to, I'm not in denial. Right. And even though I teach law of attraction, I'm also not one of these good vibes only, toxic positivity people. Like, because the whole thing is that's denial. Yeah. And we need to feel our feelings. And until we do, we can't really do all that shadow work and face those rejected parts of ourselves if we're doing the toxic positivity thing. So run from anybody who teaches that, because actually our feelings are guidance, beautiful guidance, indicators of our next step. So if you're pushing them down, by the way, they still live in your body. And when you get triggered, that's the stuff you push down. That's the stuff you didn't deal with. So the more work you do on yourself, the less you're going to be triggered in life and have these knee-jerk reactions, like you said, instead of mindful responses is what we really want to be doing. And it's just about catching yourself. And look, I'm not completely like, I can still get triggered. I get triggered. Yeah, social media triggers me. And I think we're going to all be healing till the day we die. I think there's always something to work on, for instance, but it's about catching yourself and getting through it really quickly. Like I make a joke, like I can go through the 5 stages of grief in one day, because I'm like, I do acknowledge things. I'm not suppressing them, but that's a joke. That's an exaggeration. Like if something really bad happened, I'm sure it'd take me longer than a day, but I also look at everything, like any kind of loss, as an opportunity. There's always something to be learned. And, for my vanity people out there, I lost 20 pounds just by letting go of alcohol. Because I know some people that might be their motivation, and that's okay. It was part of my motivation. In your 40s, it's not the same. You can't pull off the same stuff that we pulled off when we were younger. And I was developing insulin resistance. So that was a big part of and then when you don't sleep well, your cortisol levels are raised, and that's almost impossible to lose weight. So just by quitting alcohol, I wasn't drinking, 20 pounds worth, but my body started functioning properly again. My endocrine system, everything starts healing and functioning properly. Then you just kind of release that weight. You really do, because I was developing insulin resistance too. So I wanted to throw that out there before I didn't want to forget, because I know a lot of people listening fall in love with fitness. You're going to be thinking, you're going to be like me and be a little bit, hey, I really care about weight loss. And, it's going to happen in a healthy way by letting go of something toxic.
Yeah. Wow. So good. I've loved this conversation. You're amazing. You're so well spoken. I love everything that you share. I love your mindset, and I couldn't agree more. The most powerful force of the human psyche is how we describe ourselves. And so it's so important to keep in mind, if we're always focused on what we don't want. Here's what I don't want for me. I don't want these things. I don't want any of these things, but we don't actually spend the time to be intentional around what we do want. And to follow that with I am is life altering. So thanks for sharing. Thank you for your time today.
For your listeners.
Yes.
I did create, once I was sober, this was actually like a download to me. Like the idea was given to me. You guys, when you get these inspired ideas, jump on them, because you're not the only one getting them. So you want to jump on them and create them, bring them to manifestation. So I created this deck of cards called Addiction Recovery with the Law of Attraction. And for your listeners, I'm doing $10 off with coupon code Sherry, your name.
Well, thank you. That's so generous.
And that's on my website.
All right. Thank you so much. That's exciting. I'm going to check those out as well. Well, thank you again for your time, Mary Beth. I love this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.